Thunder crashed as rain poured down on Lego streets. Through the downpour, a frail elderly woman in a wheelchair sat abandoned at a mansion's gates, her few possessions stuffed in a torn plastic bag beside her. Her weathered hands trembled, not just in the cold, but from disbelief. "Please, my daughter," Mama Ngozi called out, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I have nowhere to go." From behind the mansion security gates, Chica watched with cold eyes. Designer dress, still crisp despite the humidity. Gold jewelry gleaming in the security lights. "You're no longer welcome here," she declared, voice like ice. "My husband is dead, and you're nothing to me now." As she turned back toward the house, a portrait of her late husband seemed to follow her with accusing eyes. Outside, Mama Ngozi raised shaking hands toward the heavens, not in anger but in prayer. "Lord," the old woman whispered as rain soaked through her clothes, "forgive her, for she doesn't know what she is doing." Little did Chica know that her actions on this stormy night would set in motion a chain of events that would bring her to her knees. Hello, guys. Welcome to Africantales by Zion. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, share it with your friends, and most importantly, turn on the notification bell so you can get informed when I drop another amazing story. Drop your thoughts and reactions in the comments. What would you do if your spouse died and you were left with their elderly parent? Would you honor your marriage by caring for them, or would selfishness take over? Let's dive in. 3 weeks earlier, the Okonkwo mansion had been filled with laughter and life. Emeka Okonkwo, a successful businessman with interests in oil and real estate, had just celebrated his 45th birthday. His wife, Chica, 20 years his junior, had arranged an extravagant party that was the talk of their elite social circle. To my beautiful wife, Emeka had toasted that night, raising his glass of champagne. Who makes every day feel like a blessing? Chica had smiled, accepting the adoration of their guests with practiced grace. At 25, she was stunningly beautiful, tall and slender, with high cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes that could charm even the most resistant heart. Her designer dress had cost more than what most Lagosians earned in a year. Standing in a corner that night, watching the festivities with quiet pride, was Mama Ngozi, Emeka's mother. Despite her wheelchair and the arthritis that had gradually twisted her once nimble fingers, she had insisted on overseeing the kitchen staff preparing traditional dishes alongside the caterer's international cuisine. "My son deserved the best," she had told the household staff, both modern and traditional, just like his upbringing. It was Mama Ngozi who had raised Emeka alone after his father died when he was just 7. She had sold fabric in the market, scrimped and saved, and somehow managed to put him through the best schools. Her sacrifice had been the foundation of his success, a fact Emeka never forgot. But Chica saw things differently. To her, Mama Ngozi was an unwelcome reminder of humble beginnings best forgotten. The old woman's traditional values and gentle corrections of Chica's extravagance were constant irritants. Worse, Mama Ngozi's presence in their home meant Emeka's attention was divided. "Must your mother comment on everything I do?" Chica had complained after the birthday celebration. "She made me look foolish in front of caterers." She means well. Emeka had soothed. "She's old-fashioned, but her heart is good. Remember, without her sacrifices, none of this would exist." Chica had merely rolled her eyes. She had married Emeka for his wealth and status, not for lessons in filial piety. Then came the day that changed everything. Emeka's driver had called in a panic. There had been an accident on 3rd Mainland Bridge. A truck had lost control, crashing into several vehicles. Emeka's car had been crushed between the truck and the bridge barrier. He died before reaching the hospital. In the days that followed, Chica moved through funeral arrangements like a sleepwalker. Lagos elite turned out in force to pay respects to the prominent businessman. Mama Ngozi, devastated by the loss of her only child, seemed to age a decade overnight. Yet even in her grief, she tried to comfort her daughter-in-law. "We still have each other, my daughter," she had said, reaching for Chica's hand during the wake. "Emeka would want us to take care of each other." But as the last mourners departed and the reality of widowhood settled in, something hardened in Chica's heart. Meeting with Emeka's lawyers, she discovered that while she inherited a mansion and considerable wealth, a significant portion of his business holdings were in trust, with Mom Ngozi as co-trustee until Chika reached 30. 5 long years away. This is ridiculous. Chika had raged at the lawyer. I'm his wife. Everything should come to me without restrictions. It was Mr. Okonkwo's wish to ensure both you and his mother were provided for, the lawyer had explained patiently, and to make sure the businesses he built would be managed responsibly until you had more experience. The implication that she couldn't be trusted with her husband's full fortune fueled a resentment that had been simmering for years. In Chika's mind, Mama Ngozi, with her constant reminders of propriety and tradition, had influenced Emeka's decision. The old woman was now an obstacle to Chika's freedom and full control of the wealth she felt she deserved. That resentment festered for weeks after the funeral. Chika began staying out late, returning home drunk from nights with friends who encouraged her newfound freedom. She ignored Mama Ngozi, leaving the household staff to attend to the elderly woman's needs. Then the final straw came when Mama Ngozi gently suggested that perhaps Chika should observe a traditional 1-year mourning period before embracing such an active social life. People are talking my daughter, she had said softly, for Emeka's memory. Emeka is dead, Chika had snapped, and I'm tired of living with his ghost and his mother. That very afternoon, as a sudden storm broke over Lagos, Chika ordered the household staff to pack Mama Ngozi's belongings. When the longtime family driver refused to participate, Chika fired him on the spot. Terrified of losing their jobs, the remaining staff complied, though tears streamed down their faces as they gathered the old woman's modest possessions. What are you doing? Mama Ngozi had asked, bewildered as Chika burst into her room, pulling clothes from drawers and tossing them into a plastic bag. You've overstayed your welcome, Chika replied coldly. This is my house now, and I want you gone. But where will I go? The elderly woman's voice trembled. My son, your son is dead. Chika shouted, the words echoing off the walls like a curse. You're nothing but bad luck. Ever since I married Emeka, you've been watching me, judging me. Now he's gone because of your evil eye. The accusation was ridiculous, a desperate attempt to justify the cruelty she had already decided to inflict. But in her rage and grief, Chika had convinced herself it was true. Despite pleas from the housekeeper and gardener, Chika had wheeled the old woman through the house and out to the gates, tossing the bag of hastily gathered possessions beside her in the rain. The security guard had stared in disbelief, but a sharp word from Chika had him locking the gate behind Mama Ngozi. Madam, this isn't right, he'd whispered, but Chika had already turned away. Now, as the storm intensified, Chika stood in the mansion's grand foyer, surrounded by the wealth and luxury she had schemed to possess fully. Lightning illuminated the space in harsh bursts, casting strange shadows across Emeka's portrait on the wall. For a moment, just a moment, doubt crept into her heart. The look in her husband's painted eyes seemed to follow her, filled with sadness and disappointment. Outside, she could still hear Mama Ngozi's prayers rising above the storm. Chika shook her head, banishing the momentary weakness. It's my life now, she declared to the empty house. My money, my future. She poured herself a glass of expensive whiskey, Emeka's favorite, and raised it in a mocking toast to his portrait. To freedom, she said, her laughter brittle in the vast, empty space. As she climbed the marble staircase to the master bedroom, Chika had no idea that unseen forces had been set in motion. That karma, patient and precise, had already begun weaving the consequences of her cruelty into the fabric of her future. Outside, in the unrelenting rain, Mama Ngozi continued to pray, not for herself, but for the daughter-in-law whose heart had turned to stone. And somewhere between heaven and earth, her prayers were heard. OMG, how could Chika be so heartless to the woman who raised her husband? What will happen to poor Mama Ngozi out in the storm? If you're feeling outraged at this cruelty, smash that like button and subscribe to Africantales by Zion. Drop a comment. Have you ever witnessed someone showing such ingratitude to those who helped them rise? The next chapter reveals how Mama Ngozi survives, and the first signs of karma working its mysterious ways. Share this video with someone who believes that how we treat others always comes back to us. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens when the heavens begin to answer Mama Ngozi's prayers. The storm raged through the night, washing Lagos streets with torrential rain. By morning, the skies had cleared, but Mama Ngozi remained where Chica had left her, outside the mansion gates, soaked to bone, her fragile body shivering uncontrollably. The plastic bag containing her few possessions had torn, scattering her modest belongings across the wet pavement. Early risers on their way to work passed by, some averting their eyes from the uncomfortable sight, others pausing briefly before hurrying on. An elderly woman in a wheelchair was not an uncommon sight in Lagos, where the vulnerable often found themselves without support. But to be abandoned outside a mansion in such an affluent neighborhood, that drew curious and judgmental glances. "Mama, are you all right?" A street sweeper finally approached, concerned by the old woman's pallor and vacant stare. Mama Ngozi looked up slowly, her usual bright eyes dulled by a night of exposure and heartbreak. "I'm just resting," she replied with dignity, unwilling to speak ill of her daughter-in-law despite everything. The street sweeper frowned. "You can't stay here. The sun will be strong soon. Do you have somewhere to go?" The question hung in the air. Where could she go? Her only child was dead. Her daughter-in-law had rejected her, and most of her old friends had passed on years ago. The modest house she had once owned had been sold to pay for Emeka's education, an investment in his future that she had never regretted. Until now, God will provide. Mama Ngozi said finally, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. Just then, a young woman approached, balancing a tray of fruits on her head. Amara was 28, with a round face that seemed perpetually set in an expression of concern for others. Her wrapper was faded from many washings but immaculately clean, and she moved with the confident grace of someone at peace with her modest station in life. Seeing Mama Ngozi, she immediately set down her fruit tray on a nearby wall. "Mama, what are you doing out here?" Amara recognized the elderly woman from the neighborhood. She had often seen her being driven to church or occasionally wheeled around estate gardens by house staff. Mama Ngozi attempted a smile. "Just enjoying the morning air, my daughter." But Amara was not fooled. She noticed the scattered belongings, the torn bag, the way the old woman's hands trembled with cold and exhaustion. With quick movements, she gathered the fallen items: a worn Bible, a photo frame, a few modest clothes, medication bottles. "You can't stay here," she said decisively. "Come with me." "I don't want to be a burden," Mama Ngozi protested weakly. "Sharing what little I have is no burden," Amara replied, already positioning herself behind the wheelchair. "It's what makes us human." And so Mama Ngozi found herself being wheeled away from the mansion where she had lived with her son for the past 15 years. She didn't look back, but her lips moved in silent prayer for the household, and especially for Chica, whose soul, she feared, was in far greater peril than her own physical body. Amara lived in a single room in a compound shared by several families in Mushin, a working-class area far from the opulence of Ikoyi, where the Okonkwo mansion stood. The room was small but meticulously clean, with a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a hot plate for cooking, and a curtained-off area for washing. "It's not much," Amara apologized as she helped Mama Ngozi from the wheelchair to the bed. The journey had been challenging, navigating broken sidewalks, dodging Okadas and Danfo buses, enduring curious stares. By the time they arrived, Mama Ngozi was feverish. Her breathing labored. "It's a palace compared to the street," the old woman replied gratefully. "God bless you, my daughter." Amara arranged her few possessions carefully, placing the photo frame of Emeka on the small table where Mama Ngozi could see it. Then she prepared hot tea with honey, a luxury she rarely afforded herself but kept for special occasions. "Drink this, then rest," she instructed. "I must go sell my fruits now, but I'll return at midday to check on you." "Why are you helping me?" Mama Ngozi asked, her voice weak but curious. "You hardly know me." Amara paused at the doorway, her fruit tray balanced again on her head. "My own mother taught me that how we treat the vulnerable reveals who we truly are." She smiled gently. "Besides, all mothers deserve honor, even when their own children forget this truth." With that wisdom hanging in the air, she left for her usual spot near the bus stop, where she sold fruits to commuters. Throughout the day, as she called out potential customers and carefully counted her meager earnings, Amara's thoughts returned to the elderly woman in her room. Who would abandon their mother-in-law, especially one so frail? The cruelty of it troubled her deeply. When she returned at midday, she found Mama Ngozie's condition had worsened. The night and the rain had taken its toll on her already fragile health. Fever burned through her thin frame, and her breathing came in shallow gasps. Alarmed, Amara sought help from her neighbor, Neka, a midwife who sometimes treated minor ailments in the community. Pneumonia, most likely, Neka pronounced after examining the elderly woman. She needs antibiotics, proper care. A hospital would be best. I can't afford a hospital, Amara said, despair evident in her voice. And I don't think she has money either. Neka considered for a moment. There's a clinic in Yaba run by the Sisters of Mercy. They treat people regardless of ability to pay. If we can get her there. And so, pooling the day's earnings with contributions from sympathetic neighbors, Amara hired a rickety taxi to transport Mama Ngozi to the clinic. The journey was uncomfortable, the elderly woman drifting in and out of consciousness, murmuring prayers and occasionally calling for her son. Emeka, my son, watch over your wife. She doesn't understand what she does. The Sisters of Mercy Clinic was a simple but clean facility staffed by nuns and volunteer doctors. Despite being overwhelmed with patients, they immediately recognized the severity of Mama Ngozie's condition and admitted her. Are you family? Sister Agnes asked Amara as they settled the elderly woman onto a narrow hospital bed. No, sister. I found her abandoned on the street. The nun's eyes widened. Abandoned? At her age and condition? Amara explained briefly what she knew, careful not to embellish or judge. Sister Agnes listened, her expression growing increasingly troubled. God sees all, she said finally, and he balances all accounts in his time. She patted Amara's hand. You've done a Christian deed today. We'll take care of her now. While Mama Ngozi fought for her life in the humble clinic, Chika was busy transforming the mansion to her tastes. Gone were Emeka's family photographs, replaced by modern art pieces. His study, once filled with books and mementos, was converted into a dressing room to house her expanding wardrobe. Madam, the housekeeper ventured cautiously one morning, have you heard any news of Mama Ngozi? Chika's expression hardened. That name is not to be mentioned in this house again. Is that understood? The staff exchanged worried glances but said nothing more. Among themselves, however, they whispered of bad omens and divine retribution. Several had already given notice, unwilling to remain in a household where such cruelty had been displayed. But Chika barely noticed their disapproval. Free from both husband and mother-in-law, she threw herself into a whirlwind of activity, hosting parties, shopping extravagantly, entertaining a rotating cast of admirers eager to console the wealthy young widow. Life is for the living, she declared to her equally shallow friend one evening as they lounged by the pool, champagne flowing freely. Why should I waste my youth in mourning? Yet despite the constant activity and company, something strange was happening in the mansion. It began with small disturbances, items disappearing only to reappear in unexpected places, lights turning on and off without explanation, the sound of a wheelchair rolling down a hallway in the dead of night. At first, Chika blamed the staff, but when her late husband's favorite watch, which she had hidden away in her jewelry safe, appeared on his bedside table 3 mornings in a row, she began to question her own sanity. Then came the dreams. Night after night, she found herself trapped in the same nightmare, stranded in a storm, cold and alone, calling for help while shadowy figures passed by, ignoring her pleas. She would wake gasping, drenched in sweat despite the air conditioning. It's just stress, her doctor assured her after she complained of insomnia. Perhaps you should consider grief counseling. It's normal to feel guilt after losing a spouse. I don't feel guilty, Chika snapped, though the defensiveness in her voice suggested otherwise. To drown out the growing unease, she threw more parties, spent more money, stayed out later. But the strange occurrences continued. The portrait of Emeka that she had relegated to a storage room somehow reappeared in the main hallway. The wheelchair ramp at the side entrance, which she had ordered removed, was mysteriously rebuilt overnight. Most disturbing were the whispers, barely audible but distinctly in her late husband's voice. You have dishonored my mother. The staff began to give notice one by one, citing various reasons, but all sharing the same fearful glances around the house before departing. New hires rarely lasted more than a few days. "The house is haunted," one may declare before walking out. "There's spiritual debt here that must be paid." Chica scoffed at such superstitions, but privately, fear was taking root. She consulted expensive spiritual advisors, had the house cleansed with elaborate rituals, even visited a renowned prophet who took her money but looked at her with knowing eyes. "The solution is simpler than you think," he told her. "Make right what you've made wrong." But pride prevented her from acknowledging the true source of her troubles. Instead, she doubled down on her pursuit of pleasure and distraction. While Chica battled unseen forces in her mansion, Mama Ngozi slowly recovered at the Sisters of Mercy Clinic. Her physical strength gradually returned, though the pneumonia had further weakened her already fragile system. More concerning to the nuns was her spiritual state, the profound sadness that seemed to weigh on her despite her outward expressions of faith. She prays constantly for someone named Chica, Sister Agnes reported to the head of the clinic. Even in her fever, she was asking God to forgive this woman. Amara visited daily, bringing small offerings, a ripe mango, fresh flowers, occasionally reading aloud from Mama Ngozi's worn Bible. The elderly woman's gratitude was overwhelming. "Why do you keep coming?" Mama Ngozi asked one afternoon as they sat in the clinic's small garden. "You have your own life, your business to run." Amara smiled. "In my language, we have a saying, 'The hand that gives is the hand that receives.' Besides, I enjoy your company. Your stories about village life remind me of my grandmother." The truth was more complex. Amara, who had lost her own mother years earlier, found in Mama Ngozi a wisdom and gentle strength that filled a void in her life. Their unlikely friendship was healing something in both of them. As days stretched into weeks, news of Mama Ngozi's situation spread through the close-knit community around the clinic. Church groups organized visits. Market women brought food and small comforts. A local carpenter, moved by her story, crafted a beautiful wooden bench for the garden where she liked to sit. So much kindness from strangers, Mama Ngozi marveled. While my own daughter by marriage, she never completed these thoughts aloud, always steering the conversation to prayers for Chica's well-being. "She is young, and grief affects people in strange ways," she would say, finding excuses for the inexcusable. "Her heart will soften in time." Meanwhile, in a twist that some might call divine irony, Chica found herself increasingly isolated despite her wealth. Fair-weather friends drifted away, disturbed by the strange atmosphere in the mansion and Chica's growing paranoia. Business associates who had respected Emeka maintained polite but distant relations with his widow, whose erratic behavior and lavish spending were raising eyebrows. Alone in the vast house one stormy night, eerily similar to the one when she had evicted Mama Ngozi, Chica paced the floors restlessly. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak in the old house sounded like accusing whispers. The portrait of Emeka stared down with eyes that followed her movements. When thunder crashed articulately loudly, she screamed, flinging her glass of whiskey at the portrait. "Leave me alone. Both of you, leave me alone." As the expensive alcohol dripped down her late husband's painted face, the chandelier above her began to sway, though there was no breeze. Lights flickered throughout the house, and in the silence that followed, she distinctly heard the sound of a wheelchair rolling slowly down the hallway toward her. Chica ran to her bedroom, locking the door behind her, but as she huddled beneath silk sheets in the king-size bed, she couldn't escape the feeling that her comfortable world was unraveling, that forces beyond her understanding were bringing scales of justice into perfect, terrifying balance. "It's just my imagination," she whispered to herself. "Just stress and too much drinking." But deep down, in a place she rarely acknowledged, she knew better. She had set something in motion the night she abandoned Mama Ngozi, something that was now returned to her like waves circling back to shore. And this was just the beginning. Wow! The mansion is becoming haunted as karma begins working on Chica's conscience. Meanwhile, kind-hearted Amara has rescued Mama Ngozi, showing that strangers can sometimes show more compassion than family. If the story of cruelty and kindness has touched your heart, Smash that like button and subscribe to Africantales by Zion. Drop a comment. Do you believe houses can become haunted when terrible injustices happen there? The next chapter brings an unexpected visitor to Chica's door that will change everything. Share this video with someone who believes in karma. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens when Chica's world starts crumbling piece by piece. The morning after the haunting episode, Chica woke to find the mansion eerily quiet. The last of the household staff, a cook and a gardener who had worked for Emika's family for over 20 years, had left a brief note of resignation on the kitchen counter. They cited no specific reason, but their hasty departure spoke volumes. "Superstitious fools," Chica muttered, though her voice lacked conviction. She moved through the vast, empty rooms, trying to ignore how her footsteps echoed in the silence. Without the usual bustle of staff, the mansion felt more like a mausoleum than a home. She was pouring herself a generous measure of gin, despite the early hour, when the security intercom buzzed. Startled, she nearly dropped the crystal tumbler. Few visitors came unannounced these days. Approaching the monitor with caution, she saw a sleek black SUV waiting at the gates. The vehicle's tinted windows revealed nothing about its occupants, but the luxury of the car suggested someone of importance. "Who is it?" she asked through the intercom, surprised by the tremor in her voice. "Chief Okafor to see Mrs. Okonkwo," came the formal reply. Chica's breath caught. Chief Depo Okafor was one of Lagos's most prominent business figures, and had been one of her husband's closest associates. They had partnered on several major developments, and Emika had often spoken to Chief with unusual respect. Unlike many of the flashy nouveau riches of Lagos, Chief Okafor was old money, with a reputation for integrity that was rare in their circles. She had not seen him since Emika's funeral, where he had offered brief but seemingly genuine condolences. Curiosity overcoming caution, she buzzed the gates open and hurried to make herself presentable, discarding the gin and quickly applying makeup to disguise the dark circles under her eyes. By the time the doorbell rang, she had composed herself into the picture of dignified widowhood, a performance she had recently neglected in her private spiral. Chief Okafor cut an imposing figure in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered despite his 60 years. He wore a perfectly tailored traditional ibada in rich navy blue with subtle gold embroidery. His close-cropped hair was silver at the temples, and his bearing suggested a man accustomed to respect. Behind him stood two younger men, bodyguards judging by their alert postures and the subtle bulges beneath their jackets. "Chief Okafor." Chica greeted with a carefully practiced smile, extending her hands in welcome. What an unexpected honor. The older man nodded, his expression reserved. "Mrs. Okonkwo, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. Please, come in." She led him to the main sitting room, acutely conscious of his appraising gaze as it swept over the changes she had made to the decor. The bodyguards remained in the foyer, positioned on either side of the entrance like sentinels. "Can I offer you something? Tea, perhaps? Or something stronger?" She gestured toward the bar cart. "Nothing, thank you." Chief Okafor settled into an armchair, his posture formal. "I've come on a matter of some delicacy." Chica sat opposite him, maintaining her facade of calm, though her pulse quickened. Had he noticed discrepancies in the business accounts? Was he here to question her about Emika's affairs? "I was abroad when I heard about Emika's passing," he began, his deep voice filling the room. "A tremendous loss. He was like a son to me in many ways." "Yes, it's been difficult," Chica replied, lowering her eyes in what she hoped appeared as grief rather than avoidance. "Indeed." The chief studied her for a long moment. "I've only recently returned to Lagos. Upon arriving, I was disturbed by certain rumors circulating." Chica's mouth went dry. "Rumors? About Mom and Ngozi." The name hung in the air between them, charged with implication. Chica fought to keep her expression neutral, though she felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Oh, they say you turned her out, into the street, during a storm." Each phrase came like the fall of a gavel, measured and damning. A disabled woman who had lived in this house for 15 years. Chica's mind raced for a plausible explanation. "Chief, don't believe everything you hear. The situation was complicated." "Was it?" His eyes, sharp despite his years, seemed to pierce through her pretense. Then perhaps you can explain why she's currently in a charity clinic, recovering from pneumonia contracted while sleeping rough. The direct question stripped away Chica's ability to deflect. She had not expected anyone in their elite circle to know or care about Mama Ngozi's whereabouts. The realization that her actions had become public knowledge among her husband's peers sent a chill through her. There were disagreements after Emeka's death, she said carefully. Mama Ngozi chose to leave. I offered support, but she declined. The lies sounded hollow even to her own ears. Chief Okafor's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Mrs. Okonkwo, he said, his formal tone growing colder. I've known Mama Ngozi for over 30 years. She was a friend to my late wife. I find it difficult to believe she would choose to leave her son's home for the streets. Chika shifted uncomfortably. With all due respect, Chief, this is a family matter. Emeka was like family to me, he interrupted, an edge entering his voice. Which makes his mother my concern as well. He reached inside his agbada and withdrew a small, leather-bound photograph album, placing it on the coffee table between them. Reluctantly, Chika opened it. The first photograph showed a much younger Chief Okafor in a hospital bed, with Mama Ngozi, also younger but unmistakable, sitting beside him. Both were smiling, though the chief appeared thin and weakened. 1992, he explained. I had just undergone a critical surgery. My business was still small then, my resources limited. The procedure cost more than I could afford. His voice softened with memory. Mama Ngozi, a widow with a young son, sold her family land to help pay for my treatment. Chika stared at the photograph, the revelation jarring against her carefully constructed justifications. She said it was an investment in the community. Chief Okafor continued, that one day I would be in a position to help others. He closed the album gently. She was right. Her faith in me helped build what eventually became my company. The same company that later partnered with Emeka, launching his career. The implication was clear. Without Mama Ngozi's sacrifice years ago, the wealth Chika now enjoyed might never have existed. I didn't know, she managed, discomfort growing under his steady gaze. There is much you don't know, it seems. Chief Okafor rose, his imposing height casting a shadow over her. I came today out of respect for Emeka, to hear your side before drawing conclusions. Chika stood as well, aware that the conversation was reaching a critical juncture. Chief Okafor, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, he cut in, his voice now steel beneath velvet. I've spoken with the clinic staff, with neighbors who witnessed the eviction, with your former household employees. He moved toward the door, then turned to deliver his parting words. You threw away your blessing, Chika. The hands you rejected are the same hands God is about to use against you. The pronouncement hung in the air like a curse. Before she could formulate a response, he was gone, his bodyguards falling in step behind him as they departed. Through the window, Chika watched the black SUV glide away, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. Chief Okafor was not just wealthy, he was connected. His influence extended throughout Lagos's business and social circles. If he chose to share what he had learned, her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was her banker, his tone unusually formal. Mrs. Okonkwo, there's been a query about the trust accounts. Chief Okafor, as co-executive of your husband's estate, has requested an audit. He can't do that, she protested, panic rising. Those accounts are mine. Actually, madam, they are held in trust with specific conditions. The chief, as a named overseer in your husband's will, has every right to ensure the terms are being met. The call ended with vague reassurances that this was merely a formality, but Chika knew better. This was the beginning of something, a reckoning she had not anticipated. Over the next several days, the consequences of Chief Okafor's visit rippled through her life with increasing intensity. Her calls to business associates went unreturned. Invitations to social events mysteriously dried up. The bank imposed a temporary freeze on withdrawals from the larger accounts pending the audit results. Then came the legal notices. The first informed her that the trust overseeing Emeka's primary businesses had convened an emergency meeting without inviting her. The second was more alarming. The tax authorities were launching an investigation into potential discrepancies in returns filed since Emika's death. "This is harassment," she shouted at her lawyer during a hastily arranged meeting. "They can't just take what's mine." The lawyer, a pragmatic man who had served Emika for years, regarded her with professional detachment. "Mrs. Okonkwo, these are legitimate inquiries. If everything is in order, you have nothing to fear." But everything was not in order. Chika had been siphoning funds from the business accounts, justifying withdrawals as widow's allowance without proper documentation. She had sold company assets without board approval. The lifestyle she had been maintaining, the parties, the shopping sprees, the lavish redecorating, had required resources beyond even the generous provisions of Emika's will. "Can't you fix this?" she demanded. The lawyer closed his briefcase deliberately. "The best advice I can offer is to cooperate fully with the auditors. And perhaps," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "perhaps consider making amends in other areas where judgment might have been impaired." His meaning was clear even in its diplomatic phrasing. Somehow, her treatment of Mama Ngozi had become entangled with her financial predicament. After the lawyer left, Chika poured herself a drink with shaking hands. The mansion felt larger and emptier than ever, the silence broken only by strange creaks and whispers she tried desperately to attribute to the old building settling. That night, the haunting intensified. The television turned on by itself, switching to a documentary about elderly care. The wheelchair, which she had hidden in a storage room, reappeared at the foot of her bed. When she fled to the kitchen, she found all the cupboards open, bare except for a single plate, cracked down the middle, placed prominently on the counter. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no relief. In her dreams, she found herself in Mama Ngozi's wheelchair, abandoned on a street that stretched endlessly. Faceless figures passed it without acknowledging her cries for help. She woke to a phone call from her accountant, his voice tight with concern. "The tax authority has expanded their investigation, Mrs. Okonkwo. They're now looking into your personal accounts as well." "On what grounds?" she demanded, fighting back panic. "Apparently, there's been a tip-off about undeclared income, and..." He hesitated. "They've frozen your personal accounts pending investigation." Chika's world tilted. Without access to funds, how would she maintain the lifestyle she had built? How would she even pay the mounting legal fees? Desperate, she called her remaining friends, the wealthy socialites who had been happy to drink her champagne and gossip at her parties. One by one, they made excuses. Appointments they couldn't break. Unexpected trips abroad. Sudden illnesses. By afternoon, reality had set in with brutal clarity. She was alone. The friends had been fair-weather companions interested only in her wealth and status. With both threatened, they had vanished like morning mist. In a final desperate move, she tried to contact Chief Okafor directly. His secretary was polite but immovable. The chief was unavailable. No, she couldn't say when he might return her call. Perhaps Mrs. Okonkwo could put her request in writing? As evening fell, Chika stood on the mansion's balcony, overlooking the manicured gardens that suddenly seemed like a mockery of order in her chaotic life. In the span of days, her comfortable world had begun to unravel, all stemming, it seemed, from that stormy night when she had made a choice born of greed and callousness. The irony wasn't lost on her. Mama Ngozi, despite being abandoned with nothing, had found support and community. People who owed her nothing had shown her compassion. Meanwhile, Chika, surrounded by wealth and privilege, was discovering the hollow nature of the connections she had cultivated. A movement in the garden below caught her eye. For an instant, she thought she saw a figure in a wheelchair among the shadows. But when she looked more carefully, there was nothing there except swaying branches in the evening breeze. Still, the impression lingered, along with Chief Okafor's ominous words. "The hands you rejected are the same hands God is about to use against you." As darkness enveloped the garden, Chika felt a certainty growing within her. This was only the beginning of her reckoning. Karma, patient and precise, had only just begun to collect its debt. Incredible, Chief Okafor's revelation changes everything. Not only was Mama Ngozi the mother of Chika's husband, but she was also the woman who helped launch both men's careers with her sacrifice. If this shocking twist of fate has your jaw on the floor, smash that like button and subscribe to Africantales by Zion. Drop a comment. Do you think Chika deserves what's happened to her, or is karma being too harsh? The next chapter shows Chika's complete downfall and a reunion that will leave you in tears. Share this video with someone who believes what goes around comes around. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens when Chika loses everything and finds herself in the same position as the woman she abandoned. The following weeks brought Chika's world crashing down with a swiftness that left her reeling. The tax investigation uncovered multiple discrepancies, resulting in substantial penalties that drained what liquid assets remained available to her. The trust administrators, led by Chief Okafor, voted unanimously to remove her as a beneficiary until full accounting could be completed, effectively cutting off her access to Emeka's business income. Most devastating was the revelation that the mansion itself had been heavily mortgaged, a fact Emeka had kept private. He had been in the process of expanding his real estate holdings when he died, leveraging their home to finance new developments. Without income from the businesses to cover the payments, and with her personal accounts frozen, Chika could not maintain the exorbitant monthly obligations. The bank's notice of foreclosure arrived on a Tuesday morning, a sterile legal document that gave her 30 days to vacate the premises. "This can't be happening," she whispered to the empty room, the paper trembling in her hands. "This house is mine. Everything in it is mine." But ownership, she was learning, was a more complex concept than she had understood. In her mind, Mirza Emeka had entitled her to all he possessed. In reality, his assets had been entangled in a web of business arrangements, loans, and family obligations that she had never bothered to comprehend. With the household staff gone, the mansion fell into disarray. Dust gathered on the expensive furniture. The garden, once immaculately maintained, grew wild at the edges. Chika moved through the rooms like a ghost, drinking too much, sleeping fitfully, ignoring the mounting notices that arrived with alarming frequency. Her designer clothes, many still with tags attached, no longer brought her joy. The jewelry Emeka had gifted her over the years began to disappear into pawn shops, exchanged for cash to buy groceries and necessities, as her credit cards were declined one by one. When electricity was cut off due to non-payment, Chika spent a night huddled in darkness, the mansion's shadows seeming to close in around her. By morning, she had made the only decision left. She would sell what she could and leave before the official eviction. The estate sale was a humiliating affair. Lagos's elite, once her social circle, now picked through her possessions with calculating eyes, offering fractions of their worth. Many came not to buy, but to witness her downfall, a cautionary tale of pride before the fall that would be whispered about at dinner parties for months to come. Didn't she throw her mother-in-law onto the street? I heard the old woman cursed her before being abandoned. Chief Okafor discovered she was embezzling from her late husband's companies. The whispers followed her as she moved numbly through the process, watching strangers carry away the trappings of the life she had thought secure. By sale's end, she had enough to rent a modest apartment for a few months and perhaps restart some kind of life. Though what that might be, she had no idea. Her education had been minimal, her skills limited to social manipulation and spending money, neither of which served her in her new circumstances. On her final day in the mansion, Chika stood in the empty foyer, her possessions reduced to 2 suitcases. The grand staircase, the crystal chandeliers, the marble floors, all would soon belong to strangers. Only Emeka's portrait remained, left hanging by the new owners as a reminder of the house's history. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked the painted face bitterly. "Is this what you wanted?" The portrait, of course, offered no response. But as she turned to leave, a gust of wind, from where she couldn't determine, blew through the foyer, slamming the heavy front door shut with such force that the portrait fell from the wall, its frame cracking against the marble floor. Chika didn't look back as she wheeled her suitcases down the long driveway for the last time, the gates closing behind her with finality that echoed in her chest. The luxury car was long gone, sold to cover legal fees. Her designer sunglasses couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes or the hollow expression that had replaced her once confident gaze. The taxi that arrived to collect her was driven by a man who showed no recognition of her name or face, a small mercy in her disgrace. As they pulled away, Chica resisted the urge to look back at what she had lost. Instead, she stared ahead, unseeing, as Lagos traffic engulfed them. Her new apartment was a one-room affair in a crowded compound, where privacy was a luxury no one could afford. Neighbors' conversations penetrated the thin walls. Children played in the narrow corridors. Cooking odors from a dozen different meals mingled in the common areas. For Chica, who had never lived in such conditions, the adjustment was brutal. The shared bathroom facilities, the constant noise, the lack of air conditioning in Lagos' sweltering heat. Each day brought new indignities she had never imagined facing. Worse was the isolation. Without wealth or status, she found herself truly alone for the first time in her adult life. No invitations arrived. No phone calls offering support. The friends who had enjoyed her hospitality when she was Mrs. Okonkwo, wife of a prominent businessman, had no interest in Chica, the disgraced widow living in a compound. Her dwindling funds forced economies she had never considered before. Designer clothes were hand-washed and hung to dry on the small balcony. Meals became simple affairs of rice and beans rather than the gourmet cuisine she had taken for granted. Each naira was counted twice before being spent. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after moving into the apartment, Chica ventured to the local market to purchase food. Her appearance had changed dramatically. The expensive hair extensions gone, replaced by her natural hair in a simple style. Her clothing now the most basic items from her once extensive wardrobe. Her face bare the makeup that had once been her armor. As she haggled with a vegetable seller over price of tomatoes, a skill she was still awkwardly acquiring. A familiar voice called her name. "Chica, is that really you?" She turned to find Amara, the fruit seller, staring at her with undisguised shock. For a moment, Chica didn't place the woman, just another face in the market. Then recognition dawned, bringing with a flood of shame. This was the woman who had taken in Mama Ngozi, the woman who had done what Chica, with all her wealth and resources, had refused to do. "Ah, yes," she stammered, fighting the urge to flee. Amara's expression shifted from shock to something more complex. Concern mixed with wariness. "You look different." The understatement hung between them. Chica knew what Amara saw. A fallen woman, hollowed by consequences, stripped of pretense. "Things have changed," Chica managed, unable to meet the other woman's eyes. "So I've heard." Amara studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that would alter both their lives. "Come with me." Too worn down to resist, Chica followed as Amara led her through the crowded market, past stalls selling everything from fabric to live chickens, toward a small side street lined with modest shops. They stopped before a nondescript building with a hand-painted sign, Sisters of Mercy Clinic. Chica's steps faltered as understanding dawned. "No, I can't." "You can," Amara said firmly, "and you will." Inside, the clinic was simple but immaculately clean. Sisters and habits moved efficiently between patients, their faces serene despite the evident poverty of those they served. Amara spoke briefly to one, who nodded and gestured toward a corridor. "She's in the garden." The nun informed them. It's her favorite place in the afternoons. Chica felt as though she were moving through a dream as Amara led her through the building and out into a small courtyard. Flowering plants grew in pots and beds, creating an oasis of color and fragrance in the midst of the urban neighborhood. At the center, beneath the shade of a young mango tree, sat a wheelchair. Mama Ngozi looked both better and worse than when Chica had last seen her. The immediate crisis of pneumonia had passed, but the illness had taken a permanent toll on her already fragile health. She seemed smaller somehow, more transparent, as if the boundaries between her physical form and the spiritual world were thinning. She was singing softly to herself, an ode about God's faithfulness, her gnarled hands folded in her lap. She didn't notice their approach until Amara gently touched her shoulder. "Mama, you have a visitor." The elderly woman looked up, her eyes taking a moment to focus. When they did, and she recognized Chica, a range of emotions crossed her face in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, concern. But not anger, not hatred, not the vindictive satisfaction Chica had feared. "Chica?" Mama Ngozi's voice was weaker than before, but still carried the warmth that had once filled their home. "Is it really you, my daughter?" The familiar term of endearment, my daughter, broke something in Chica that had been hardening for months. She fell to her knees before the wheelchair, her body racked with sobs too long suppressed. "Mama, please forgive me. I didn't know what I was doing." Gentle hands, twisted by arthritis, but still strong in their purpose, reached out to stroke Chica's bowed head. "My child, I forgave you the day you threw me out. But now you see, God humbles us to teach us love." Chica looked up through tears to find no judgment in the older woman's eyes. Only a compassion, so profound it seemed almost tangible in the quiet garden. "How can you forgive so easily?" she whispered. "After what I did to you?" Mama Ngozi smiled, the expression illuminating her thin face from within. "Forgiveness is not for the one who wronged you. It is a gift you give yourself. Bitterness is a poison that kills the vessel that carries it." She took Chica's hands in her own, the contrast stark. One set smooth and youthful despite recent hardship, the other gnarled and marked by decades of labor and sacrifice. "Besides," she added softly, "I see my son's spirit in you, fighting to emerge from beneath pride and fear. Emeka will want us to find peace with each other." At the mention of her late husband, fresh tears spilled down Chica's cheeks. "I dishonored his memory. I lost everything he worked for." "Things," Mama Ngozi corrected gently. "You lost things, but perhaps you found something more valuable in their place." The wisdom in those words penetrated Chica's consciousness, a truth she was only beginning to comprehend. In losing the mansion, the wealth, the social position, she had been stripped down to her essential self, and found it wanting. But perhaps that recognition was the beginning of something new. Amara, who had been watching this reunion with quiet emotion, approached with a handkerchief for Chica's tears. The simple kindness from a woman who had every reason to judge her harshly underscored Mama Ngozi's lesson. "I have nothing left," Chica confessed, wiping her eyes. "Nowhere to go after my rent money runs out." "That's not true," Amara contradicted softly. "You have us now." Later, as afternoon faded toward evening, the three women shared a simple meal in the clinic's small dining area. Sisters and patients at nearby tables cast curious glances their way, but the privacy of their conversation was respected. "What will you do now?" Mama Ngozi asked as Chica picked at food she would once have considered beneath her notice, but now recognized as a blessing. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no skills, no education beyond secondary school. She hesitated, shame coloring her admission. "I was only valued for my beauty and my husband's position." "Nonsense," the older woman said firmly. "You manage a large household. You organize events. You have abilities you've never acknowledged because they didn't seem important in your previous life." Amara nodded agreement. "The clinic always needs volunteers. Not glamorous work, but necessary." Chica looked around at the simple surroundings, so far removed from the luxuries she had lost. Was this to be her life now? Serving in a charity clinic, living in a cramped apartment, counting coins for basic necessities? Yet as humbling as the prospect was, she felt something stir within her, a sense of possibility that had been absent in her spiral of self-pity. Perhaps here, among those who had shown her undeserved mercy, she could begin to rebuild not just a life, but a self worth living in. "I would like to help," she said finally, the words feeling strange yet right on her tongue. "To make amends, if that's possible." Mama Ngozi reached across the table to pat her hand. "Amends are always possible when the heart is willing." She smiled, a glimpse of mischief lightening her usually serene expression. "Besides, these old hands still have much to teach, if you're finally ready to learn." As darkness fell over Lagos, Chica found herself walking back to her small apartment with Amara, who lived in the same neighborhood. The streets were noisy with evening activity. Children playing, music from competing sources, the calls of food vendors making final sales of the day. "Thank you," Chica said quietly, the words still unfamiliar in her mouth, "for taking me to her. For everything." Amara shrugged, adjusting the empty fruit basket balanced on her head. It wasn't for you, she said honestly. It was for Mom Ngozi. She prayed for you every day, even when she was sickest. Her heart wouldn't have peace until she knew you were all right. The simple truth humbled Chica further. Even in illness and abandonment, Mama Ngozi had thought of her welfare. How had she been blind to such goodness for so long? Do you think, she began hesitantly, do you think I can change? Truly change? Amara considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I've seen rivers change course, she said finally. I've seen barren land bloom after rain. Why not a human heart? She glanced sideways at Chica. But it won't be easy. The person you will fight to survive. I don't want to be that person anymore, Chica whispered, the admission both frightening and liberating. I don't even recognize her now. They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of Lego's evening enveloping them. As they neared their compound, Amara spoke again. Tomorrow is another day. Mama Ngozi always says that God's mercy is new every morning. She smiled, a quick flash of warmth in the gathering dark. You can start again, Chica. We all can. In her tiny room that night, lying on a bed that would once have seemed intolerably hard, Chica thought about new beginnings, about rivers changing course, about hearts transforming through humility and grace. Outside her window, Lagos continued its relentless rhythm, a city of extreme wealth and desperate poverty, of soaring ambitions and crushed dreams. But for the first time since her world had collapsed, Chica felt a flicker of hope, not for the return of what she had lost, but for the discovery of something she had never properly valued. As sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed not of mansions and luxury, but a simple garden where an elderly woman's hands guided her own, teaching her at last what truly mattered. Tears. Chica has lost everything but gained what money could never buy, forgiveness and a chance at redemption. If this emotional reunion between Chica and Mama Ngozi has touched your heart, smash that like button and subscribe to Africantales by Zion. Drop a comment. Do you believe true forgiveness has the power to transform even the hardest heart? The final chapter reveals how Chica rebuilds her life through service and discovers the true meaning of family. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to change. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the beautiful conclusion to this powerful story of karma, forgiveness, and second chances. The morning light filtered through the clinic windows, casting gentle patterns across the worn linoleum floor. Chica moved quietly between beds, checking on patients, straightening blankets, offering water to those who were awake. Her movements had gained efficiency over the weeks, the awkwardness of her early days as a volunteer replaced by growing confidence in these simple but necessary tasks. Good morning, Mrs. Adebayo. She greeted an elderly woman recovering from malaria. Did you sleep better last night? Like a baby, my daughter, the woman replied, her smile revealing missing teeth. Those new medicines the sisters gave me worked wonders. 2 months had passed since Chica's reunion with Mama Ngozi in the clinic garden. 2 months of daily visits that had gradually transformed into regular volunteer work. At first, she had helped with only the simplest tasks, sorting donated clothing, serving meals, reading to patients who couldn't see well enough to read themselves. But as the sisters recognized her reliability and willingness to learn, they had entrusted her with more responsibilities. For Chica, who had never worked a day in her life before Emeka's death, the experience was transformative. Each task completed brought a satisfaction she had never found in shopping or socializing. Each grateful smile from a patient offered a different kind of currency, one that couldn't be spent but somehow never diminished. Chica, could you help in the supply room today? Sister Agnes approached, her practical shoes squeaking slightly on the clean floor. We received a large donation of medications that need sorting and cataloging. Of course, sister. Chica had learned to value the nun's no-nonsense approach and clear directions, so different from the deference she had once expected from household staff, yet ultimately more respectful in its assumption of competence and good intent. In the small supply room, Chica worked methodically, organizing bottles and packages according to the clinic system. She had discovered an unexpected aptitude for administration, keeping track of inventory, maintaining order in limited space, anticipating needs before they became urgent. skills she'd use to manage her social calendar and wardrobe, repurposed for healing rather than status. Through the open door, she heard Mama Ngozi's wheelchair approaching, the familiar squeak of its right wheel announcing her arrival before she appeared. The elderly woman spent most mornings in the clinic garden when weather permitted, tending the medicinal herbs she had introduced, another contribution from a woman who never stopped giving despite her limitations. "There you are," Mama Ngozi said, maneuvering her wheelchair into the doorway. "Sister Agnes said I'd find you buried in boxes." Chica smiled, rising from her crouched position to greet her mother-in-law. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could have imagined in their shared past. Not quite mother and daughter, but something equally profound. Teacher and student, perhaps, or simply two souls walking a path of redemption together. "Just finished," Chica replied, dusting off her hands on the simple cotton dress she now wore, so different from her former designer wardrobe, but far more practical for her new life. "Have you had your morning medications?" Mama Ngozi waved away the question with an impatient gesture. "I didn't come to be fussed over. There's someone here to see you." Curiosity piqued. Chica followed as Mama Ngozi led the way back through the clinic to the small administrative office. Standing there, looking somewhat out of place in his expensive suit, was Chief Okafor. Chica froze, memories of their last encounter flooding back. His judgment, his pronouncement, the beginning of her downfall. She instinctively glanced down at her simple dress, her unadorned hands, her practical shoes, all evidence of how far she had fallen from the woman he had last seen. "Mrs. Okonkwo," he greeted her formally, though his eyes held something unexpected, not condemnation but evaluation. "Just Chica now," she corrected quietly. "I have no claim to my husband's name anymore." The chief's eyebrow rose slightly at this, but he nodded. "Chica, then, I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all." Mama Ngozi interjected before Chica could respond. "She's just finished her morning tasks, haven't you, my dear?" The familiar term of endearment gave Chica strength, whatever the chief had come to say. Perhaps final legal proceedings or news of the complete dissolution of what remained of her former life. She would face it with the dignity she was slowly building in this new existence. "Would you like to speak privately?" she offered, gesturing toward the garden where conversations could happen away from the busy clinic corridors. Chief Okafor nodded, following as Mama Ngozi led the way. In the garden, beneath the young mango tree that had witnessed their reconciliation months before, the three formed an unlikely triangle. The fallen socialite, the disabled elder, and the powerful businessman whose intervention had catalyzed change. "I've been following your situation with interest," the chief began once they were seated, his deep voice measured and deliberate as always. "After our last meeting, I had my staff keep me informed of developments." Chica felt heat rise to her cheeks at the thought of reports being compiled about her disgrace, her eviction, her new humble circumstances. But she raised her chin slightly, determined not to show shame for a path that, despite its difficulties, had brought her to a better understanding of herself. "I'm sure you found the reports enlightening," she said, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. Chief Okafor's expression softened unexpectedly. "Indeed, they tell a story of transformation that is rare in my experience." He glanced at Mama Ngozi, who was watching them both with serene attention. And impressive, the compliment, so unexpected after their last encounter, momentarily robbed Chica of response. Before she could formulate one, the chief continued. "I came today for two reasons. First, to see Mama Ngozi and ensure her health is improving." He inclined his head respectfully toward the elderly woman. "And second, to discuss a proposition with you, Chica." Wariness replaced surprise. In her former life, propositions had often come with hidden costs or expectations. "What kind of proposition?" "A job offer," he replied simply. "My foundation, the one that helps fund this clinic among other charities, needs someone to manage our medical supply distribution. Someone detail-oriented, efficient, who understands both the practical and human aspects of the work." His gaze was direct. "Sister Agnes tells me you've shown remarkable aptitude in this area." Chica glanced at Mama Ngozi, wondering if this had been her idea, another act of kindness toward the daughter-in-law who had wronged her so grievously. But the elderly woman's expression revealed nothing beyond interested attention. "Why would you offer me such a position?" Chica asked bluntly. "After everything that happened?" The chief leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Because I believe in second chances when they're truly earned. And because talent shouldn't be wasted, even when it requires redirection." He withdrew a folder from his briefcase, opening it to reveal details of the position: a modest but respectable salary, clearly defined responsibilities, opportunity for advancement based on performance rather than connections. "It's not charity," he added, as if sensing her thoughts. "It's practical. You've proven your abilities here. My foundation needs those abilities." The offer represented more than employment. It was legitimacy, a pathway back to self-sufficiency without sacrificing the lessons of her fall. Yet Chica hesitated, her gaze moving to Mama Ngozi. "I've made commitments here," she said softly. "To the clinic, to Mama." "Which you can still honor," Chief Okafor interjected. "The Foundation office is nearby, and your schedule would allow for regular visits. Besides," he added with a small smile, "part of your job would involve coordinating with clinics like this one. You'd hardly be abandoning your work here, merely expanding its reach." Mama Ngozi, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "What do you want, Chica? Not what you think you should want, or what others might expect. What does your heart tell you?" The question hung in the fragrant garden air. 6 months ago, Chica would have answered without hesitation. She wanted her old life back, her status, her wealth, her comfortable existence. But now, "I want to be useful," she said slowly, discovering the truth as she spoke it. "I want my life to have meaning beyond myself. I want—" She looked at Mama Ngozi. "I want to honor Emika's memory in the way I should have from the beginning." The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Then your answer is before you." Turning back to Chief Okafor, Chica nodded. "I accept your offer with gratitude, but I have one condition." The businessman raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Part of my salary must go directly to support Mama Ngozi's care." She lifted her hand when the elderly woman began to protest. "Not because you need it, Mama, but because I need to give it. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but the attempt must be made." Chief Okafor nodded, understanding the symbolism of the gesture. "Agreed." As they discussed practical details, Chica felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, not the burden of her reduced circumstances, which she had come to accept, but a heavier weight of undefined purpose that had haunted her even as she found her way at the clinic. Before the chief departed, he paused, looking at Chica with an expression that combined approval with something like wonder. "You know," he said quietly, "Emika once told me his greatest achievement wasn't his business empire, but finding a wife who, beneath her youth and beauty, had a potential for true greatness of spirit." He smiled slightly. "It seems he was right, though perhaps not in the way either of you expected." The compliment, connecting her present self to the husband whose memory she had dishonored, brought fresh tears to Chica's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for the opportunity, and for seeing something in me worth salvaging." "We are all worth salvaging," he replied simply, "though some must lose everything before they discover this truth." A month later, Chica moved into a small but comfortable apartment closer to both the Foundation offices and the clinic. Though modest by her former standards, it represented progress from a crowded compound room, a tangible sign of her gradual rebuilding. Her work at the Foundation proved challenging but deeply satisfying. Her organizational skills, once devoted to social events and shopping expeditions, now ensured medical supplies reached clinics throughout Lagos efficiently. Her growing understanding of healthcare needs, gleaned from months volunteering, helped her anticipate requirements before they became critical shortages. Most meaningful, however, was her continued relationship with Mama Ngozi. Though no longer seeing her daily at the clinic, Chica visited regularly, often spending her days off accompanying the elderly woman to church or simply sitting in the clinic garden, sharing conversation that had evolved from cautious politeness to genuine affection. It was during one such visit, nearly a year after the stormy night, when Chica had abandoned her mother-in-law at the mansion gates, that Mama Ngozi's health took a sudden turn. Her breathing, compromised since the pneumonia, became increasingly labored. Despite the sister's best efforts, it was clear that her time was growing short. "Don't look so sad," Mama Ngozi told Chica as they sat together in a room that had become her permanent home at the clinic. "I've lived a full life, raised a good son, found peace with my daughter." She reached for Chica's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "And I've seen God's redemptive work with my own eyes. What more could I ask?" Chica fought back tears. "More time," she whispered. "We've only just found our way to each other." The elderly woman smiled gently. "There are meetings that last moments, but change lives forever. And there are lifelong relationships that never touch the soul." She squeezed Chica's hand. "We've had what matters most, truth between us. The rest is just time, and time belongs to God." Over the following days, Chica arranged to work remotely, spending as many hours as possible at Mama Ngozi's bedside. They talked when the elderly woman had strength, sat in comfortable silence when she didn't. Sometimes Chica read aloud from the worn Bible that had been Mama Ngozi's constant companion. Other times she simply held her hand as she drifted between waking and sleep. One serene morning, as sunlight streamed to the window, creating patterns across the simple bedding, Mama Ngozi asked for paper and pen. Her hands, gnarled by arthritis, struggled to write, but she insisted on completing what appeared to be a letter. When finished, she folded it carefully and handed it to Chica. "For after," she said simply, "when I'm gone." "Mama, please don't." "Hush, child." The familiar gentle rebuke carried all the authority it had always held. "We must speak truth, even about endings." She settled back against her pillows, suddenly looking very tired. "Promise me something." "Anything," Chica replied without hesitation. "Live fully, not for wealth or status. You've seen how quickly those fall away, but for purpose, for love, for the chance to leave each place better than you found it." Chica nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "And," Mama Ngozi continued, her voice growing fainter, "forgive yourself as I have forgiven you. The past is a teacher, not a prison. Learn from it, then let it go." That evening, with Chica still at her side, Mama Ngozi slipped peacefully away. There was no dramatic final moment, just a gentle exhalation that wasn't followed by another, a subtle transition from life to whatever lay beyond at the sisters. With her deep faith, assured Chica was merely a homecoming. The funeral was simple but well attended. Clinic staff and patients, community members who had come to know Mama Ngozi during her time there, representatives from Chief Okafor's foundation, and even a few former household staff from the mansion days all gathered to honor a woman whose quiet strength had touched more lives than she had ever realized. To Chica's surprise, Chief Okafor himself attended, standing respectfully at the back of the small chapel. After the service, as people shared memories over a modest meal, he approached her. "She was a remarkable woman," he said simply. "Her investment in others yielded returns beyond measure." Chica nodded, finding comfort in his business metaphor that somehow captured Mama Ngozi's practical spirituality. "She taught me that true wealth isn't what you have, but what you give," she replied. "A lesson I learned far too late." The chief studied her for a moment. "Not too late," he corrected gently. "Just in time." That night, alone in her apartment, Chica finally opened the letter Mama Ngozi had entrusted to her. The handwriting was shaky but legible, the message brief but powerful. "My daughter Chica, when you read this, I will be with my son and my God, both of whom loved you more than you knew. Remember this. Karma brought you to your knees not to punish, but to position you for prayer. What seemed like an ending was merely a beginning. The mansion you lost was made of stone and wood. The home you found is built in hearts and souls. One crumbles with time, the other endures beyond it. Lie beautifully, give generously, forgive quickly, and know that you are loved, not for what you have or how you appear, but for who you are becoming. Your mother in spirit, if not in blood, Ngozi." Tears flowed freely as Chica read and reread the letter, feeling both loss and profound gratitude. From her small balcony, she looked out over Lagos at night. The same city where she had once ruled as a social queen now transformed her perception from a playground of the wealthy to a community of interconnected souls, each with their own struggles and triumphs. 1 year later, a small gathering assembled in the clinic garden to dedicate a new addition to the facility. The Ngozi Okonkwo Memorial Wing will provide expanded care for elderly patients, particularly those without family support. Its creation had been a labor of love for Chika, who had worked tirelessly to secure funding, design appropriate spaces, and ensure that every detail reflected the dignity Mama Ngozi had embodied. Chief Okafor, whose foundation had provided matching funds for the project, stood beside Chika as she cut the ribbon. Her position within his organization had grown, her natural intelligence and newfound compassion making her particularly effective at identifying needs and implementing solutions. She would be proud, the chief said quietly as they toured the new wing with its simple but comfortable rooms, accessibility features, and the garden views Mama Ngozi had so cherished. "I hope so," Chika replied. "It still feels inadequate compared to what she gave me." "The best memorials aren't buildings," he reminded her. "They're changed lives. Yours. Those are the patients who will find refuge here. The ripples continue outward in ways we can't always see." After the ceremonies concluded and the guests departed, Chika remained in the garden alone, sitting on the bench beneath the mango tree that had now grown tall enough to provide genuine shade. She had placed a small plaque there, bearing the words that had become her guiding principle: "To Mama Ngozi, the mother who loved even when wronged." Beneath this, in smaller lettering, was the lesson she shared with anyone who would listen. Don't wait for karma to teach you mercy. As evening fell over Lagos, casting long shadows across the garden, Chika reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From privileged wife to desperate widow, from cruel daughter-in-law to devoted caretaker, from shallow socialite to purposeful woman. The path had been painful, the lessons hard-won, but sitting in the peaceful garden, surrounded by evidence of lives improved through her work, Chika felt a contentment that all her former wealth had never provided. Karma had indeed struck hard, but its blow, delivered with perfect aim, had broken open a heart capable of far more than she had ever imagined. What a powerful ending. Chika's transformation from cruel daughter-in-law to dedicated humanitarian shows that even the hardest heart can be redeemed through humility and forgiveness. If this emotional story of karma and redemption touched your soul, smash that like button and subscribe to Africantales by Zion. Drop a comment. What moment in this story moved you the most? Was it Mama Ngozi's forgiveness, Chika's fall from grace, or her beautiful transformation? Remember Mama Ngozi's powerful message. Karma brought you to your knees not to punish, but to position you for prayer. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that message of hope and redemption. Turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful African tale that teaches wisdom our modern world desperately needs. Africantales by Zion. Stories that touch hearts, change minds, and remind us of timeless truths our ancestors always knew.